Meet my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Now, it's one thing to build a car. It's another thing entirely to build an automotive dynasty. The modern car as we know it may have been born in Germany, but it was in France that it truly began to take its modern shape in the late 19th century. Regarding this period of car development, Jay Leno has often quipped that Germany was the birthplace, but France was the nursery. And in France, Albert de Dion had already proved that if you had money, you didn't have to be a good engineer to make cars, just be a good businessman. But what if you had all of them? If you had money, were a good businessman, and a good engineer, this was the era to make a car that would stand the test of time. And no other make of car has passed this test to this very day than the one founded by Armand Peugeot. The guy is a classic example of someone destined to be a gearhead. He was born in 1849 in Hermiancourt, France, into a family that already owned a significant manufacturing company. The Peugeot family firm had been stamping out things like saw blades, springs, and even eyeglass frames for some 100 years. So the idea of mass production and quality control was natural for him. He studied engineering so as to apply his schooling to the family business and helped drive efficiency and profitability. By 1865, he was a managing partner in the company with a few other relatives and began to be a driving force in the direction the firm went in the marketplace. The first direction he went was to start making bicycles in 1882, as this was the age of quite a bicycle craze, so there was a buck to be made. And in 1888, he decided to go one step further. Didion Bouton had been manufacturing steam cars for a few years at this time, and Armand wanted a piece of the action. Lucky for him, there was a fellow by the name of Leon Serpollier that home-built a steam tricycle in 1887 that was about the only thing puffing around Paris at the time. Peugeot got a hold of him and worked out a deal to make these trikes with his name, money, and marketing muscle. Leon was no fool, and by 1889, the first Peugeot branded car based on Serpollier's design appeared at the 1889 Paris Exposition. This particular international exposition was a pivotal moment in automotive history, which is why you all have heard me mention it so often as of late. There were several steam cars on display made by companies like Peugeot, Didion Bouton, and others, but Benz and Daimler showed up with gas-powered cars and were offering their cars and/or engines for sale or license to manufacture. The impact of their presence at the party in Paris was powerful. Now, steam power had been around for more than 100 years by that time, and engineers and even much of the common populace were somewhat familiar with its basic principles. The kinks in them had long before been worked out, and so steam engines were reliable, strong, and fairly simple to maintain. Gas or petrol-powered engines were the new kids on the block and were not, at that time, capable of producing the raw torque that steam engines can, and unlike them, needed transmissions with multiple gears to gain speed. This made them more complicated and more prone to failure, as well as more difficult to repair, as the ironmongers and engine garages of the time knew how to fix steam engines but knew nothing about gas ones. On the other hand, if you wanted to take a ride in your steam car, you'll spend about a half an hour getting the thing warm enough to build a head of steam and be able to start moving. Not so with the internal combustion engine. Just by setting the fuel and timing and then turn the crank, you were ready to roll, as long as it didn't backfire and break your thumb off. Another advantage was weight and space. Steam engines are big, heavy puppies when you consider and include the size and weight of the boiler. Gas engines are much smaller and lighter by nature and thus more easily adaptable. Armand Peugeot, like Albert de Dion, believed that ultimately the gas engine was going to win this market war, reasoning that the current shortcomings it does have would get worked out in short order. So he also approached Daimler to purchase a bunch of his engines, which of course Uncle Gotti said, "Yeah." And so Peugeot changed its production from steam cars to gas cars using Daimler engines. The first rolled out of the factory in 1891. It was driven by a Daimler V-twin engine of 1,018 cc's, producing about 3 3/4 brake horsepower. Two-speed gearbox drove the rear wheels via chains, and it could do about 19 miles an hour flat out with a tailwind. It was immediately popular, and the Peugeot factory began pumping them out like sausages. However, his original partner and engineer, Leon Serpollier, wasn't having it, so they parted ways. Leon did continue with his own company, making a variety of steam vehicles, which we'll address in another episode. Now, at this time, Armand did not have sole control over the Peugeot company. It was primarily shared with his cousin Eugene, and the two didn't agree on how much to invest towards their manufacturer. Making cars was just a division of a larger family company at that time. So, with Eugene's blessing, he shaved the division off the parent company and went independent in 1896, keeping, of course, the family ties and the family name of the company. Armand had already begun developing his own engines, which replaced the Daimler engines in the same year. In 1897, Peugeot built their first car with their own engines, the Model 14 Velo. A parallel twin-cylinder four-stroke engine of 1,645 cc's pumped out a mighty 4 horsepower. Now, they didn't make many of these, barely more than a dozen, but much was learned from it, and in short order they were pumping out improved models and variations on the theme. Peugeot developed their engine and applications for the engine with great enthusiasm. By 1900, Armand's company was making just about any kind of vehicle that could be found on the road. I can assure you, there will be plenty of episodes regarding Peugeot cars of the vintage era in the future. But for now, let's take a moment, raise a glass of wine for the Frenchman who built the longest single-standing automotive firm in the world today. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History. We'll see you next week. Peace.